What's up guys, my name is Olivia Grace and welcome to Wowhead's preview of Bloodmaul Slag Mines, one of the Warlords of Draenor leveling dungeons. You can see from the map that's in front of us right now that the dungeon is arranged with an initial circular area with one boss to the left and one boss to the right. Killing these two bosses opens up the bridge you can see in the middle of the map there with another boss on it, which in turn leads you to the final boss's room. First up though, we're just going to take a little bit of a look at some of the trash mobs. Now there's various important effects available from the trash mobs, the first of which we're going to have a look at now. So you can see here that there is a cloud of purple smoke that appears on the floor which silences anyone within it. As you can see, I will walk in and out of it again, which will still apply the silencing effect. These puddles persist until the caster is dead. All of the mobs are ogres, and there's various very hard-hitting abilities, one of which we just saw there, where the mage was gripped with a chain into a ground effect, which the druid was also standing in. These can hit really, really hard. While the trash isn't necessarily the worst we've seen in the game in dungeons, it certainly will get your attention, and it's well worth CCing some of the larger pulls and using AoE stuns, AoE CC, as well as personal and survival cooldowns to get through this trash. And there's a mixture there, as you can see, of caster mobs and melee mobs. Several of the caster mobs have interruptible abilities, and towards the last boss, some of them even cast fears, which you should, as a shaman, certainly be using a tremor totem to get rid of. Within the dungeon, as well as the four main bosses, there's also several elite sort of semi-bosses, such as this one, which is a boar. Now you just saw a patrol there. You've got to be really, really aware of patrols here in Bloodmaul Slag Mines, as they are very ubiquitous in the circular area at the start of the dungeon, and pulling too many mobs in this dungeon could well result in a wipe. Now here we can see Slagner, who is a miniature Magmor, is another one of the optional sort of elite bosses in the dungeon. They don't really have any problematic abilities. The boar, which we just saw there, was dispatched with ease, has a similar double swipe to Horadon, and this one, Slagner, drops some fire on the ground, but if you're able to avoid those very simple ground effects, you'll take basically no damage and get these bosses down easily. Honestly, that's the moral of the story in this dungeon. If there's stuff on the ground, do not stand in it. These encounters are very, very movement heavy in certain places, as we'll see once we get onto the boss fights. Now, later on in the trash, you can see here there is a gauntlet style fight. You'll see this is lots and lots of fire elementals. The footage has been sped up, but what you'll want to do here is stand on the tank, take down the central elemental whilst the tank is dealing with the smaller ones. And as we can see here, it takes a little while to get these guys down, but you can see at the bottom there is a large elemental mini boss, I suppose, and once he is pulled and killed, these small elementals will stop spawning. On my several runs of this dungeon to get the footage for this video, we suffered several sort of near wipes in this area just because players weren't keeping up or getting stuck behind. The elementals will just carry on spawning until this big guy is down, so it's important to carry on through there and stay with your tank. Now we're moving into the first boss fight here. The first boss which we're seeing here is Magmolatus, who is accompanied by this large ogre guy. And the ogre guy doesn't do an enormous amount of problematic damage, but he's definitely worth interrupting wherever you can. You can see here he's casting some fire effects on the floor, and obviously that effect was not interruptible. And again, just stay well outside of all of the ground effects and you will be absolutely fine. It's worth noting at this point, as we look at these ground effects, which include some spikes and some void pools there, and some fire in them obviously, that there will be a full run through of this dungeon at the end of this video. There's also several debuffs flying around in this fight, which is a very, very good idea to dispel if you are able to. They will inflict considerable damage as well as spreading around. Now once you've got rid of this ogre guy, you will then see Magmolatus appear. And indeed, here he comes. So Magmolatus has a few more problematic abilities. Again, it's best to stay out of the ground effects. You can see a very big one there. These do very, very high damage to the tank and some melee DPS. And he also calls down these other elementals, which is worth keeping an eye on and interrupting, as well as finishing off as quickly as you can see members of the party doing here. Damage in this fight is relatively low as long as your players are able to avoid the ground effects and kill the elementals quickly. There is of course some AoE damage which you can see there as the elementals land, but it's really not the end of the world and can be healed through relatively easily. It's just really important that those elementals go down quickly, remain interrupted, and also that your players are adept at avoiding standing in the bad. And of course remember to keep those debuffs dispelled from your other players. Moving on to the next boss, who is on the right hand side of the map. This boss is Slave Watcher Crushto. Now he has various different abilities which are very important to avoid, such as this floor spike, which will do very high damage to anyone who is caught standing it. He also has an ability called Ferocious Yell, which it's very important to interrupt. It will actually cause him to do additional damage to his targets, which will make his ground-based abilities hit even harder. Now he will also target players with a Crushing Leap, which we've just seen there. This will cause miners in the area to come towards those players and ignore taunt effects, so you're very well advised to pop a survival cooldown at that point. As you can see here, some miners are coming in to fixate on other players, and there was a Ferocious Yell that went off there that was not interrupted, and you can see that the damage there just adds up. It will also do damage to all players, so it's very important to keep him interrupted as much as possible. You can see here the miners are starting to build up, and until they are killed they will remain untauntable as far as we can tell from alpha testing so far, so it is important to try and get those guys down as much as possible. Damage in this fight seems to build up and up until it gets to a certain point where you will have to use some cooldowns just to get players topped back off again, but apart from that it's relatively straightforward. As you can see here, I've taken on interrupting as many of the Ferocious Yells as possible, which has a huge impact on the amount of damage going out to the party. It's not a hugely problematic fight as long as your group are able to avoid these spikes on the ground and keep that Ferocious Yell interrupted as much as you can, as well as dealing with the miners. But as long as you're able to deal with these simple mechanics, you're not going to have a huge amount of trouble with this boss. Now after you get this boss down, a cinematic will play, which we'll take a look at right now. Now following that cinematic, you will gain access to the third boss in the dungeon, whose name is Rolltall. As you can see, he's a large fire elemental and probably the most difficult encounter in this dungeon. You'll be well advised to have your party completely healed up following the trash, which of course you can see in the full version of the run in this video. Now one of his most annoying abilities are these rolling boulders. If you look at the foot of the bridge near to Rolltall, you can see circles appear on the floor where the boulders are about to spawn in, which will give you plenty of time to get out of the way. Now this becomes considerably more difficult later on in the fight with his other two abilities. You can see the second ability here, which is a damaging wind, which also blasts you backwards across the bridge. As you can see, I am able to cast while I'm moving, as long as I do not try to run into the wind. This is very important to realize as a healer, and you'll really want to have people hotted up or healed up as much as you can before that starts. His third ability is seen here, which is that he throws out fire, which will continue to coat the bridge for the rest of the match. As far as we can tell at this point, he does not cast that fire on specific players, so there's no really good way to make sure that he's not putting it in certain places. As you can see, that fire persists through the second round of boulders, and at this point it's really just a matter of time before you are completely overwhelmed by the fire, as well as the damage coming from the wind and the boulders. It can get a little bit tricky, so you're really going to want to bring decent DPS ability to this fight and keep those players healed up as much as you can so that the boss goes down quickly. Given the option between the two, I would personally take the short stun and the damage from the boulder over the enduring damage from the fire. It's a difficult decision to make, of course, and it's very subjective, but that seemed easier to heal to me. However, Rolltall does not have a huge amount of health, and it was relatively straightforward to take down with a good group putting out decent DPS, as well as players who are able to use their own survival cooldowns and stay out of the fire. Moving on to the final boss of the instance after some more trash, this is Gug'rokk. Gug'rokk uses Molten Blast as his primary attack, gaining Molten Core with each successful cast. Now if he reaches 3 stacks of Molten Core, he will cast Molten Barrage, causing group-wide damage. You can see here that Gug'rokk is spawning in magma eruptions which cause pools of magma beneath players' feet. Now if you're having problems with this fight, it is highly possible to stand together and get the magma in a certain place. Here you can see these elementals which need to be slowed and killed as quickly as possible so that they do not reach the furnaces which they are shooting for with those large beams. If they get to the furnaces, they'll actually become unchained and start attacking players, which can become very problematic. Now you can see here that the floor is being quite carpeted with these pools of fire. Again, you are able to position those quite carefully if you stack up. Particularly for melee players, dealing with the pools of fire as well as dealing with the elementals can be very difficult. Fortunately, this group which I have had 2 range DPS and only 1 melee. But healers, we really will want to make sure you do your best to stay in range of all your DPS as well as your tank during these fights, as the damage can be quite high. Again, all of your slowing abilities, your roots, your snares, everything will do good to help these guys kill the elementals before they reach the furnaces there. You can see here we're kind of getting painted into a corner. Obviously positioning in this fight can be very important, particularly if you have lower DPS, and interrupting the boss is very, very important. And you can see here that I've got him set as my focus, and I'm doing my best to keep him interrupted as much as possible. This makes the fight so much easier to do. And indeed, once you've got him interrupted most of the time, it's quite straightforward as long as you get your positioning fairly well and try your very best not to stand in the fire. Now, these are the 4 bosses, and you've also seen the 2 lower level bosses within the dungeon, as well as some pointers on the important parts of the trash. There is, of course, a full run through to follow, unedited, so if you have the time and want to look at specific parts of the dungeon, then here it is. Thank you for watching, and join us again.